Imagine stepping into a dimly lit hallway where every footstep echoes just a little too loudly, and the air itself seems thick with secrets. It is in these shadowy corridors, whether in ancient castles or forgotten attics, that phantom tales have always found their home. Today, we delve into one such tale, a narrative that has drifted through our collective memory like a whisper, sometimes barely heard, and sometimes impossible to ignore. But what precisely is a phantom tale? The term doesn't just refer to ghosts or spectral figures. It captures a much broader phenomenon, stories that exist on the fragile edge between reality and myth, blending truth, speculation, and the great unknown. These are the narratives that linger in the background of history, shaped as much by what is left unsaid as by what is told. They might begin as a rumor in a small village, grow into a legend passed from one generation to the next, and eventually become so woven into the fabric of a culture that it's hard to tell where fact ends and fiction begins. Consider the notorious Phantom of the Opera. Born from Gaston Leroux's early 20th century novel, the Phantom is not merely a ghost haunting the Paris Opera House. He is a symbol of hidden genius and unspoken pain, a character who moves through the darkness, shaping events from behind a mask. While Leroux's story is fiction, it was inspired by real rumors of secret passages and mysterious happenings in the Palais Garnier, rumors that swirled in Parisian society for decades. This potent blend of fact and folklore is what gives phantom tales their enduring power. And these tales are not confined to literature. Across the world, countless stories echo this motif. In Japan, the yurei are restless spirits, often depicted as figures in white, gliding soundlessly through ancient houses. In the American South, the legend of the Bell Witch haunted Tennessee in the early 1800s, with locals reporting eerie voices, poltergeist activity, and chilling apparitions. Each of these stories shares a common thread, something unseen, something just out of reach, shaping the lives of those who dare to listen. Why do these tales persist? Part of the answer lies in our primal fascination with the unknown. Shadows invite curiosity. They beckon us to look closer, to ask questions, to imagine what might be lurking just beyond the edge of the candlelight. Before electric lights and instant communication, a strange noise at midnight or an unexplained chill in the room was often enough to spark a story that would ripple through a community for years. As we journey forward, we will follow the threads of one particularly elusive phantom tale, examining not just the story itself, but the way it has seeped into art, music, and even the architecture of the places it haunts. Because phantom tales aren't just about the ghosts in the shadows. They are about the whispering stories that help us make sense of the mysteries that surround us, inviting us to listen, to wonder, and perhaps to discover something hauntingly true. Tucked away from the bustling avenues and glaring neon lights, there was once an alley that most city dwellers hurried past without a second glance. Its cracked cobblestones and weathered brick walls bore silent witness to decades of stories, both whispered and shouted, all of them lost to the relentless hum of city life. But it was here, in this overlooked corridor, that a legend began to take root, one that would ripple far beyond the shadowy confines of the forgotten alley. The year was 1947. Post-war optimism buzzed through the city, but the alley remained stubbornly unchanged, a relic resisting the march of progress. Local residents called it Shadow's End, a name born from the way dusk seemed to settle there long before the rest of the city surrendered to night. Few ventured down its winding path unless necessity demanded it, delivery drivers cutting corners, or children daring each other to brave its gloom for a nickel. Yet it was in this unlikely setting that Tommy Fingers Malone, a name now etched into the city's folklore, first made his mark. Tommy was just a teenager then, another face in the crowd, but he possessed a knack for listening, a rare talent in a world eager to shout over itself. He spent his afternoons on the stoop of Mrs. Klein's bakery, his back pressed against the cool stone, his ears tuned to the rhythm of passing footsteps and the snippets of conversation that floated down from open windows. One chilly November evening, a commotion erupted at the far end of the alley. A stray dog had darted into the path of an oncoming truck. Panic swept through the small crowd that gathered, but Tommy moved quickly, weaving through the confusion, and with a deftness that would become his signature, he scooped the dog into his arms just as the truck screeched to a halt. The dog, a wiry terrier with mismatched eyes, would come to be known as Lucky, and from that night on, neither Tommy nor the alley would ever be the same. Word of Tommy's fearless rescue traveled quickly. Neighborhood elders recounted the tale with growing embellishments, how Tommy had supposedly stared down the truck, how Lucky had leapt into his arms from an impossible distance. Soon, the alley itself became the stage for late-night storytelling, where children huddled together, eyes wide, as the legend of Tommy Fingers Malone took on a life of its own. The once-forgotten alley became a gathering ground, its walls echoing with laughter, and the kinds of dreams only possible in the quiet corners of a great city. This was the true birth of the legend. It wasn't forged in grand halls or on the front page of a newspaper, but in the shared memory of ordinary people, in the echoes bouncing off stone and brick. Here, in Shadow's End, hope and heroism took root, reshaping not just an alley, but the community that claimed it as its own. Every crack in the pavement, every faded mural, became a chapter in a growing story. A reminder that even the most unremarkable places can become the cradle of legends. From the specific, we turn to the universal. Let's step deeper into the heart of the myth, to an enigmatic figure known only as the Watcher with no name. Across countless versions of this phantom tale, this mysterious being sits at the center of the lore, acting as both observer and guardian, sometimes menacing, sometimes silently compassionate. But who or what is the Watcher? And why does this archetype persist in stories across cultures and centuries? First, let's paint a picture. The Watcher is rarely described in detail. Most tales agree on a few shadowy features: a tall, indistinct shape, often cloaked or hooded, with eyes that seem to glow or sometimes remain hidden altogether. There is a sense that the Watcher is both everywhere and nowhere, appearing at the edge of forests, on lonely crossroads, or even standing silently outside a window on the darkest of nights. The lack of a name isn't a quirk, it's a defining trait. By refusing to name the Watcher, storytellers keep the figure just out of reach, unknowable and unclaimable. This anonymity fuels the myth's power, making the Watcher a living stand-in for whatever we most fear or wonder about in the unknown. But the Watcher is not always a villain. In some stories, especially those from Eastern European folklore, the figure appears as a warning, a silent sentinel who materializes before disaster strikes, giving those who notice a chance to change their fate. Take the old Slovakian tale of the bezmenný pozorovatel, or nameless watcher, who haunted a remote mountain village. Whenever he appeared at the edge of the woods, the villagers would take extra care, believing his presence meant wolves or storms were near. In this way, the Watcher became a kind of unspeaking protector. Contrast that with the chilling accounts from rural America, where the Watcher is sometimes seen as a harbinger of doom. Here, the Watcher is a figure glimpsed just before tragedy, a barn fire, a mysterious illness, a disappearance. The Watcher doesn't cause these events, but its presence is an omen, a symbol that the fabric between the everyday and the supernatural has thinned. Scholars suggest that the Watcher's lack of identity is precisely what makes the myth so universal. It's a blank canvas onto which communities project their own anxieties and hopes. Is the Watcher a test of courage, a warning to heed our instincts, or a reminder that some things are simply beyond our understanding? Perhaps it is all of these at once. Even today, people report sightings: a stranger on the roadside, a shadow in the backyard, a feeling of being watched just out of view. The Watcher with no name persists, not because of what we know, but because of what we don't. This figure sits at the intersection of fear and curiosity, a timeless reminder that sometimes the greatest mysteries are the ones that remain unnamed. What truly brings a city to life isn't just its skyline or its bustling markets. It's the stories whispered and shouted by the people who call it home. These are the voices of its residents, past and present, whose memories, testimonies, and sometimes outlandish tales have woven the city's unique character. Consider the testimony of Maria Alvarez, who has run her flower stall on the corner of 4th and Main for over 40 years. She remembers when the city's grandest skyscraper was just a hole in the ground, and how each morning construction workers would buy her carnations for luck. I watched the building grow, floor by floor, just like my family, Maria recalls. Her story isn't just about flowers, it's about resilience, tradition, and the quiet ways people root themselves in a changing world. Then there's James O'Leary, a retired firefighter whose dramatic account of the Great Warehouse Blaze of '92 has become a local legend. According to James, flames shot 50 feet into the night sky, and the heat was so intense it melted streetlights a block away. "We formed a human chain, passing buckets hand to hand," he says. Some details may have grown in the retelling, but the core remains, a community coming together in crisis, forging bonds that would last for decades. Of course, not every city story is so earnest. Urban legends swirl through alleyways and coffee shops, passed from one generation to the next. Ask anyone about the midnight musician, the mysterious saxophonist who, legend has it, haunts the subway tunnels beneath downtown. Some say he's a ghost, the spirit of a jazz man who never made it big. Others insist he's just a clever prankster. Yet every so often, a commuter swears they've heard the soulful strains echoing through an empty platform just before the last train. Testimonies from the city's immigrant communities add another rich layer. Mrs. Liu, who arrived from Shanghai in the 1970s, describes her first Lunar New Year here. "We didn't know if people would join us, but soon the whole block was celebrating. The dragon danced past shops of every language." Her voice is a reminder of how traditions, old and new, are reshaped by the city's ever-turning wheel. And then there are the tall tales that tiptoe along the line between fact and fiction. Take the story of the lost lake beneath City Hall, a supposed underground reservoir where, rumor has it, turtles the size of dinner plates roam. No one's ever produced a photo, but ask any city maintenance worker and they'll wink knowingly before changing the subject. These stories, testimonies grounded in truth, and tall tales spun from imagination, give the city its soul. They remind us that a city is more than bricks and mortar. It's a living archive of dreams, fears, resilience, and humor, all spoken in 1,000 different voices. But what happens when these powerful narratives collide with the cold, hard ground of reality? Urban legends have a way of gripping our imaginations, especially when they involve something as familiar as the roads beneath our feet. Let's dig into the truth beneath the asphalt and separate fact from fiction. First, consider the surprisingly persistent myth that a secret network of government tunnels exists beneath every major American freeway. Popularized by movies and the internet, this idea paints a picture of covert military operations and hidden bunkers right under our tires. The reality? While some highways do have service tunnels, these are typically used for utilities or maintenance, not for shadowy government agents. Constructing a vast concealed tunnel network would be astronomically expensive and impractical, given the immense engineering challenges. Another enduring belief is that roads are sometimes deliberately designed to be confusing, particularly near urban centers, to control traffic or even to trap outsiders. But road layouts are the result of decades of urban growth and changing land use. Boston's famously tangled streets, for example, evolved from old cowpaths and colonial cartways, not from some nefarious agenda. Modern transportation engineers use complex modeling and traffic studies to design roadways with safety and efficiency in mind, not to confound drivers. Then, there's the tale that certain highways are intentionally built with subpar materials to ensure they need frequent repairs, funneling tax dollars to construction companies. While infrastructure contracts can be lucrative, federal and state regulations require rigorous oversight and materials testing. Problems with road quality are far more often the result of budget constraints, climate challenges, and the sheer volume of traffic rather than deliberate sabotage. The freeze-thaw cycles in northern states, for instance, can wreak havoc on even the best-laid asphalt. So why do these myths persist? Partly, it's because roads are everywhere, but few of us understand how they're actually built. When something goes wrong, an inexplicable traffic jam or a fresh pothole, it's easier to imagine shadowy motives than mundane realities. The truth beneath the asphalt is less about conspiracies and more about the complex interplay of engineering, weather, and bureaucracy. And in its own way, that story is often more fascinating and far less sinister than the legend. This brings us to the most profound question of all. What is the legacy of a history that never happened? The concept of a never-ending night is more than a metaphor. It's the lived reality for countless cultures and ideas that have been erased or overlooked by official narratives. The legacy of a non-existent history is a shadow that stretches across generations, shaping identities, opportunities, and the way entire nations understand themselves. Histories become non-existent in many ways. Sometimes it's through deliberate erasure, conquerors destroying the records of those they subjugate, or regimes rewriting the past to legitimize their power. The burning of the Library of Alexandria has become a symbol of knowledge lost forever. In more recent times, the destruction of indigenous records during colonial conquests systematically wiped out centuries of language and tradition.
In these dark chapters, history is not just forgotten, it is forcibly obliterated. But the never-ending night is also born of neglect. Consider the stories of women in science. For centuries, brilliant female minds contributed to mathematics, astronomy, and medicine, but their discoveries were frequently attributed to male colleagues or left unrecognized. Ada Lovelace, the world's first computer programmer, was largely ignored until the 20th century. Rosalind Franklin's crucial work in discovering the structure of DNA was overshadowed by her male peers, only receiving proper acknowledgement decades later. These omissions perpetuate the myth that certain people simply didn't contribute, that their stories are not worth telling. This legacy of absence matters. When people look for themselves in history and find nothing, it sends a powerful, damaging message. You do not belong. You have no roots here. For marginalized communities, this can create a sense of alienation that persists across generations. African American history was long relegated to the margins of textbooks, reducing centuries of struggle and achievement to a handful of paragraphs. The same is true for indigenous peoples around the world, whose histories are often told only from the perspective of their colonizers. The consequences are real. A lack of historical representation can impact everything from self-esteem to political engagement. Conversely, reclaiming lost histories can be a source of tremendous empowerment. The recent resurgence of Black, Indigenous, and women's histories is not just about setting the record straight. It's about shining a light into the never-ending night, revealing the richness and complexity that was always there. And so, the legacy of a non-existent history is not just about what has been lost, but about our ongoing responsibility to recover, restore, and retell the stories that were nearly consigned to darkness.
It is a call to vigilance, to ensure that no more voices are lost to the shadows, and that the night does not, in fact, last forever.